Welcome to Strength in the Numbers. My name is Andrew Codd, accountant, author, and commercial finance entrepreneur, and it's my job each week to bring you leaders in finance and business and deconstruct with them their real stories, insights, and hard-won lessons into practical advice on the key strengths and qualities you need to remain relevant in accounting and finance today, as well as the steps you can begin to take to elevate the impact you make to have a fun, successful, and rewarding career in accounting and finance. Now let's go over to the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Strength in the Numbers. Now, how do you know as a finance professional if you're hitting the right notes with your clients and business partners? Well, our guest mentor this week is Patrick Leavy, who shares some of his practical answers that have worked for him and can work for you too. As we go further into the episode, we also discuss Patrick's unique career journey, which could be seen as actually taking a bit of a back-to-front approach to becoming an accountant, because Patrick initially started his career performing and writing music, having worked on 15 TV documentaries before then qualifying as an accountant in the public sector, and then going on to be a financial consultant to schools before joining, as he calls it, one of the most forward-thinking accounting firms in the UK. So look, Patrick and myself got on really well. It was a really interesting episode. Patrick takes us through a number of different areas. For example, some common threads between being a finance professional and his experience of visual direction and music. Also, some really good practical ways on how to get clients and leaders to engage more with their finance professionals and their finance support. And also the three main challenges facing Patrick's current clients, and a straightforward bit of advice that we could all take to actually reduce the number of business failures that we see and hear around us. So look, I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did recording it with Patrick. If you did, please check out our timestamp show notes where we highlight all the key areas covered at various stages of the conversation, some of the key quotes. Patrick mentions a number of key resources, and we also provide links to those in there too. And we'd also appreciate you letting your friends and your colleagues know about us. We're on all the major platforms: iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and YouTube. And again, really appreciate you listening in. So without further ado, over to Patrick and the show.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on the show, because I'm a big fan. I'm a sort of like long-term listener, first-time caller kind of situation. But yeah, no, you're quite right. I've come about things slightly the opposite to some, and definitely had a very strange route into finance. So I started off probably the same. I was kind of scientific and maths oriented at school, and then went to study engineering at Edinburgh University, but quickly realised that I didn't really want to be an engineer for various reasons. And so obviously you don't want to pursue a course if you're not going to do it. So I switched to psychology and completed my degree in psychology there at Edinburgh, and that was great. You know, I find that just fascinating, and still do. But then, of course, it would have been too easy just to be a psychologist, right? So I went off and switched completely and went into a career in music, because I was a musician anyway. But I wanted to be a producer. You know, I came down to London with big ideas. I'm going to be a producer. Like, there's no other producers in London, you know, and did that for a while. I was performing and writing, and ended up doing music for documentaries. That was great. So that was many years, and had about 15 documentaries on telly, and worked with a number of directors. And then I always had a part-time job at the same time, because as you might imagine, music, is a tricky one to keep money coming on. So I always had an interest in finance. So I had a part-time job on the side. But then when the downturn came, you know, like 2008, 2009, started getting qualified, got into finance, and didn't particularly mean to, but just kind of veered off into the public sector. And then ended up working in the education sector. And did 4 years of being what they called a school's finance advisor. So that was going out every day, working in different offices every day, being a finance consultant, basically. And yeah, it was great. It was fascinating. It was a kind of all-in-one job. So you were doing the year-end accounts, you were doing all the governance, the compliance stuff, but also the day-to-day and month-to-month management accounts. kind of working with the business leaders, so to speak, head teachers and what have you, and governors. And then I kind of decided that I always wanted to stay in that kind of consultancy area, as opposed to going in and working in one business. So when I decided to move my life away from London and back to near where some family were up in Norfolk, which is where I am now, and that's how I ended up going sort of backwards into practice, the opposite way that other people do, because I wanted to stick with the whole consultancy, working with many businesses rather than one, because it's more about helping and problem solving. So it kind of is the natural thing. And then I found this firm where I'm working now, which are Farnell Clark, and I just was lucky that up here in Norwich, it just so happens that one of the most forward-thinking firms in the country, like one of the only ones that's been cloud only for the last 10 years or more, is right here. So I sought them out and came for a chat, and I've been here for a couple of months.
Yeah, so I mean that's definitely something I'd love to follow up with you more. I think it's fantastic hearing about forward-thinking accounting firms outside our major, I suppose, commercial centres. So that is really fantastic. But there are some sort of parts on your journey I'd love to go into a bit more, Patrick. And when you were sort of describing sort of being involved in the music and the documentary business, I was wondering, I could sort of see, how we prepare, reports or insights and stitch together a story for our audience, the business leaders. Like, is there any sort of useful skills you've sort of identified there that you could perhaps say you've brought into your current work when you're advising clients and businesses?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked, because I was going to try and explain all that. It does seem like a completely random path to where I've got to, but there are actually common threads that run through it, which are you are a specialist, one, and you're working with people who immediately say, I don't know anything about that. Okay, but they need what you do. You are then a translator. So you're trying to take what you ask them what they need, and then they come out with a whole load of stuff in a completely different language. So in music, they go, hey, look, I don't know anything about music, but I want something which kind of feels like this, and it's a bit like this other film. And they give you this whole thing, which is non-musical thought. And you have to translate it into music, and then you make the music, and then you give it back to them saying, I think this is what you meant. And, from what you say, this is what you need. And so you end up, interpreting what, in that case, a director, or in business, a business owner, you interpret what they say they need, and you deliver the sort of specialist thing that they're after. And that's kind of similar in finance, in the sense that I've had exactly the same language. Like, the first thing they'll say is, I don't know anything about finance. And it was uncanny. It was just the same. It was like, I don't know anything about music. And they get really defensive. And so your first job is to kind of say, listen, just don't worry about all that. We're here to work together. And so it's about sort of translating those two languages of business and finance, or visual direction and the music, to bring them together.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting parallels. And then from there, I hadn't quite heard the expression before, school's finance advisor, but like I remember sort of asking you about the role at the time. I found it really fascinating. So like, I suppose in terms of the work in the education sector, what was the bit you enjoyed the most, or where you felt you made the biggest impact for the schools you served?
What I enjoyed the most was definitely, it was the way you could make such an impact each month, really. But the most enjoyable thing for me was when I really turned a corner with it and realized that it's not just the numbers in the system, that obviously we do use them to interpret and say, this is what this means and this is what could be down the track. But it was more about the fact that bringing in all that HR data in particular, because the schools I was working with they'd be employing about between 50 and 75 people. So staff costs, and so that was a huge part of it. So I was realizing that, or bringing all that in, and making reports with non-financial information in them was a real big deal. But it was the relationships, really. So you be getting to know these head teachers, and you really become a sort of trusted other. And you realize that being at the top of an organization is actually quite a lonely spot, because everyone's at them for this and that. They're responsible for everything. And I don't know, it's similar to a business in a way, but it's probably even worse in schools, because the governors really have the ultimate responsibility for running the school, except the head teacher is actually executing on that. So they're kind of caught between, all the staff wanting this and that, and all the stakeholders and the parents, and then you got the governors above them saying that they want this, that, and the other, and everybody's speaking different languages, finance, and whatever else. So it was just kind of getting those relationships together with the head teachers and realizing that they could really talk through what they felt was important with someone who they felt was not biased, because there's a lot of politics going on, and I enjoyed becoming in that position of being a sort of advisor.
I suppose when you lay it out like that, Patrick, I mean, you probably just maybe not appreciate the amount of stakeholders they have to look after, and then I'll top it off. I mean, you can't get much more precious than people's kids, right? So it's an awful lot of responsibility there.
It can be, yeah. And when things go wrong, they'd be in the press and everything, So it was quite a...
Yeah. So, I suppose, then in terms of supporting people going through that, what is the biggest challenge, we as finance professionals could help them overcome?
For them it's an educational thing. I mean, no pun intended, obviously, in the first sector, but it was more about making sure that people, whenever you speak about finance to them, you have to make sure your job is to say, okay, 3 or 4 months from now, 6 months or whatever, my goal is that when I say something finance related, they actually think about it the same way I do. Because so many times you think you're being really clever and you come out with some, snazzy report and some data you pull together, and you're like, ta-da, look at this. And they go, oh yeah. And the thing to realize is that they're always going to nod sagely and go, yeah, I see. But I learned the hard way over those years that a lot of the time it's just not actually going in, and they just never going to use that information. It's just not happening. And it's difficult because you look at them and right there they're nodding and saying, yes, I like it. That's brilliant. Yeah, that's really good. It's really useful. But absolutely no idea what you're talking about. But they don't want to admit that because, they're the kingpin there, and they don't want to be admitting to that. So it's that thing of saying, right, I have to make sure they know what I'm talking about. So, but you have to question that without, being sensitive to the fact that you can't just say, hey, listen, I don't think you know what I'm talking about, do you?
Yeah, no, 100%.
So it was learning that those sort of skills of dealing with people and being able to communicate the idea properly.
No, but you raise a very important point because you're dealing with people in essentially positions of a lot of power, influence, and they don't want to come across as not understanding something that they probably should know. So for our audience, Patrick, are there maybe 2 or 3 things that you could share with us or break down for us where you can know that's the case, that they're either getting the message or they're not getting the message, and trying to turn it around so that they do?
Yeah, I mean, from that sector, a good example is the timing differences that are involved. So I could be saying, look at this, your numbers have changed. That means you need to start planning ahead. You should probably take some action now. Have you thought about your staff levels or whatever? That's how I used to do it at the beginning. And I would think that someone would hear that and go, okay, I need to start planning now.
Makes sense.
But they don't. They go, okay, he's telling me numbers have changed, and I need to sort of do something. It was kind of vague, and nothing taken on board. So in schools finance, you have what you're funded on in this year is based on your pupil numbers the previous year. So it's lagged. So you're always a bit of a step behind in terms of the data. So and that's the other thing. Even when you say, lagged student numbers are going to have an effect. Still, absolutely no effect on action. Nobody does anything. So you have to really spell it out. So it was really saying that literally the minute you see them drop, you have to be starting to think about maybe a restructure and all that kind of thing. And that's painful. You know, they're very close with the people they work with. All their teachers are their kind of their generals. You know, they're all doing it out there in the field. They don't want to be getting rid of them and stuff like that. And I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. So sometimes you realize that people just not taking it on board at all. And you have to really spell it out.
Well, I like what you did there is you find like an emotional connection for them. There's something that they can feel, and then it sort of brings the numbers a bit more to life, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the big things that I learned over the time, and which I will bring into this new job, is that in finance, it's not a great idea just to state some numbers, even movements of numbers, which is more helpful. It's much better, I think, to think of how the other person thinks, what's important to them, and then quantify the figure you just gave them in terms of something they can relate to. So in schools, it was, well, look, your figures are dropped by this. That is 1.5 teachers. And they immediately go, oh, right, okay, oh my God. And then, you know, they're on the, before they were slightly glazing over and just going, oh God, it's the finance guy. So yeah, quantifying stuff and putting it in their language is really important, I think.
Yeah, great example. And you did mention your new job, so, and I know you're really excited about that. So I guess what's the bits you really enjoy most about it at the moment?
Well, I mean, all of it. It's amazing. I'm just so privileged to have found this firm that are really, really looking ahead the whole time, you know, from day one. And what excites me most about it is that it's just the sheer scope of being able to continue helping people. Because that's the bit, like in the music and in the schools, it was always the sort of being the translator, helping people along. And just the sheer scope of being able to do that all again now, but in a new sector, is really exciting. Because I kind of, you know, I'd done 4 years in schools and I thought, right, it's time for a new challenge. So what I'm here to do at Farnell Clark is to lead on the sort of bringing out the advisory offer. Because mostly it's been compliance-led with some advisory, but the whole buzzword in the industry now is everyone has to be more consultative and what have you. So that's what really excites me, is the fact that I can now get into a new sector and help people out.
And like in your mind, Patrick, I suppose making that more tangible for clients is, I suppose, what does advisory mean for you and for your clients, I guess?
Right. Okay. So for me, it's been about learning a new sector and being able to speak their language, because that's what I learned to do before. I can remember at the beginning when I couldn't, and I can see how much more effective you can be. And also, we deal with lots of different industries here. So the main clients we've got are from all sorts of different industries. So at least in the beginning, it'll be about becoming something of an expert-ish in those industries, so that I can speak that language and, in particular, find the right metrics. That's been key. I'm obsessed with it now. I'm trying to work out what's the most important things to measure in that industry that will be able to make an effective change. So if they're not making enough money at all, or if their profit margins aren't big enough, or if they've got problems with staffing, or whatever happens in that industry. So I can say to them, listen, if we measure this one thing and we keep on top of it and just put it into, this is a bit of advice I was given a while back, was you don't just say we need to change this and then monitor it every month, because it becomes a chore. And it becomes something that they're just like, okay, we're looking at that again. You got to put it into projects and say, okay, this is going to be a project that will last from this date till this date, and we're going to see who's going to be deployed on it and what we can do about it. And it could be something as simple as just we need better data out of the warehouse, in a fulfillment business or whatever. And so we're just going to say to this person who works there, could you start to try and measure this? And so nothing flash, but it's sort of measurable, bite-sized chunks, and it gets people more motivated to be able to do stuff.
Definitely. And I suppose, like, in terms of the challenges out there, Brexit's a big topic. But rather than focus so much on that, I suppose, what are the main challenges that businesses you serve, that the business owners, the leaders you serve, what are some of the main challenges that they're facing at the moment, Patrick?
The main one that's common to all small businesses, which is short-term cash flow. So a lot of people, with only a few exceptions of people who are really, really doing well, and then it's more about what do I do with all this money? The investment side, trying to pick the best moment to invest and where. But on the most part, it's because we deal with businesses round about the kind of turnover of between like 100K and a million, but so they're kind of small. So yeah, it's cash flow, and it's keeping on top of it. It's the three main problems people face is a money issue, just worrying about literally having the money to do it. It's time, so it's trying to win back some of the time for them, and we do that through various efficiencies and whatever, trying to make things run more smoothly, and then just peace of mind in general. So trying to give people back one of those or all three of those things: cash, time, and peace of mind.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it. I'm excited working with small businesses. It's always something, because I suppose I grew up around them, and ran my own business as well. And I think one thing that gets me, Patrick, is that statistic that over the long run, say 30, 35 years, only one business out of 10 that starts will actually still be in existence. And like, given the accounting profession out there and the skills we have, like, why is that number not looking better? Like, what's preventing us doing, even if we made it 2 out of 10 surviving, that's still 100% improvement. So like, what could our listeners be doing for not just maybe the small business but larger? Like, what's the things we should be doing to improve those survival rates?
Well, I think the first challenge is to make sure that your firm, you become the first person they think of whenever they make any kind of move, or if they're worried about anything in their business. So that's the key thing. Just in the case of anything legal comes up, you're going to think of your lawyer, right? So anything financial, anything to do with your business, you just think, I'll just run it past my accountant first. As opposed to you only think about them when you want to think about your tax or getting some compliance work done. So I think that's the key, is trying to change that perception.
And like no, I completely agree with you. Like, what sort of, because I suppose there's that annual cycle, tax returns, accounts, so on. How do we get them to think about us outside of that? So to say, is it do we have to make the first move, or
we do.
What have you seen works?
Yeah, no, we do. Yeah, I think the key is for and this is me turning up in this sector 2 months in. This is just what I think at the moment so far, in my opinion. It's just that people need to who are working in firms in practice just need to take an interest. I think stage one is being curious. So as opposed to that them and us mentality of they won't give me the details and I can't get the return done, and what are these guys like? It's thinking, all right, never mind all that. First of all, why are they not doing that? Think of the benefit. So you could kind of get around all those problems, and then while you're at it, you think, well, actually, what do they do? I imagine some people who are working on the year-end accounts not even sure what the client does. It's just, are these numbers correct? Is this an allowable expense or whatever? Which is fine. That's vital work. But it's just kind of taking more of an interest and thinking, what do they do? And then when you're speaking to the client, always in the back of your mind, you're thinking, how could I help? Because as you said, there's a big skill set already there, just not being utilized.
I think it's taking an interest, and like more in a proactive sense, sort of like, obviously when a business goes under, it fails, it runs out of money, it's like after the fact. I mean, that's the great thing with the numbers, are sort of saying, like, completely, this is the result of your decisions, right? So if you can get ahead, or if we can get ahead of making those
Yeah.
decisions and making better ones, just because they think either, right, I want to run it by my finance guy, my accountant, or, you know what would my finance guy do? You know, even if they could think a bit like that, I think
Yeah.
we start moving the needle, which is good for society, because like they are the main engines of our economies, the smaller businesses.
No,
So
absolutely.
I'd love
Yeah,
to see
yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's the next bit I was coming to. So what I was just going to say, it's the proactive thing. So once you've taken an interest, you have to start thinking, well, that's great, but they're never going to come to us because, like you say, the culture's not there for that to happen. So it's just making more contact points and just calling them up and just saying, right, let's go through the month end. And instead of just emailing a report or just saying, because we work in the cloud on Zero, so you could just say, your numbers are ready, and they log in and look at them. And they can. I mean, that's the beauty of it, is it's one system and you can see it from anywhere and whatever. But that's no good, because then they're just sitting there looking at numbers going, great. You know, is it positive at the bottom? Okay, that's about as much as I'll take. So yeah, it's getting more involved. And my job has been to do the more visual representation of month-end accounts and go through it with people. So that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I think we need more of that, Patrick, and I really appreciate the advice you've shared with us. I suppose, in terms of yourself, I mean, what's been the best bit of advice you've ever received?
Well, I've had several mentors throughout my career, and I do tend to stay in touch with them. And one guy who was the finance director at the last place I worked, I said to him I might be moving on, you know, in the future, and I have now up into a new sector. And when you make a big move like that, it's quite easy to kind of panic and just go, you know, I'm supporting a family. I just need to get a job. I need to get the best paid job, and I need to get established and and think like that. And he said, don't do that. Do not do that. This is a chance to do something you really enjoy and get what you will thrive in. So his advice was be authentic. Just go with what you think is going to be the best thing, and never mind the salary. And that was fantastic.
Yeah, it's a shame, I suppose. Like, to be honest, that's why I got into accounting. It's like you can make really good money being an accountant,
Right.
but then it's finding your area, right? That you know, I mean, that's the wrong way of looking at it. It's like what would you enjoy doing, and why would you? Because that's a sustainable career that's going to give you rewards over the long term, you know, and
Absolutely. Yeah.
you know. But Patrick, no, I completely agree with what you said, and I suppose in terms of any resources that have helped you along your journey, you could perhaps recommend to our audience.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's one that I know you're familiar with, which is that book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. That's an absolute revelation. It's just fantastic. I don't know why that's not mandatory in schools. I don't get it. It's just fantastic because that's one of the two skills that I think are not taught in schools that should be. Which is, one is how to manage money, not in a business,
Definitely,
not in a business sense,
yeah,
just like
yeah,
in life, you know,
life.
and also how to deal with people. So how to interact with people normally, successfully, and that's what the Dale Carnegie's book does. How to Win Friends and Influence People. A couple more that I've read the last 6 months. Well, there's two that I'm still actually reading. One is the Art of Possibility by Rosamund Stone Zander, and that's a fascinating book about. Again, it's to do with dealing with people. Kind of useful for if you're in a managing role and just how to deal with teams and groups and whatever. And one of the big takeaways from that was this thing he calls giving people an A grade. So he's saying, like, at the beginning, if you're doing an appraisal cycle, you at the beginning of the year, you say, I'm giving you an A grade, like, or whatever you call it, like whatever the top of your appraisal is. And all you've got to do to earn it is go away and write down what you did. So you look from now forward and imagine you're at the end of the year and you say what you did to earn that. Like, why? And he said this is the most powerful thing. People sit there writing it all down and just by default, they just do it in the end. So you end up, there's less pressure, people actually doing, they're working well. And it's just a very different way of thinking about it. The other one is more of a kind of, more of a psychology book. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And yeah, that's quite it's a slightly heavier read, but it's just fascinating for especially those of us in finance, where we come into finance because we're quite logical and numerical. And we like to think that if you just tell someone that here's a fact, and here it is on paper, and I proved it in numbers, you'd like to think that that would just result in someone going, oh, okay, yeah, and then they'll take action. No. And this book lays it out in many different ways to explain that, particularly the big takeaway is that emotion trumps logic every time, for most people. I mean, for some not. But the fact is, as a finance professional, you're dealing with most people, and we're the other.
Definitely, yeah.
So it's just seeing it laid out in many chapters and proved that actually, really, logic loses out to emotion a lot of the time. So it's pretty valuable when you're trying to translate stuff. And the other thing is, I'm a real devourer of podcasts. I love them. So I would say a great resource is your podcast, Andrew. It's absolutely fantastic. You have really great stuff going on there. But there's another one. There's three actually that I'm particularly into. One is the Cloud Accounting podcast by Blake Oliver and David Leary, and another one is Cloud Stories with Heather Smith. She's a big name in the sort of cloud accounting scene over in Australia. And the other one is the CFO podcast by Christopher Argent. He's really trying to drive the transformation in finance to be more outward looking, get out from behind the desk kind of message. And he's got some great forums that he's now running and stuff. So I think it's called Generation CFO. He's quite active on LinkedIn. So yeah.
No, great recommendations, and completely. Well, I wouldn't be as familiar with the first two podcasts, but the last one's definitely Chris Argent. Great person, great contributor to our profession. And as you said, he's very active, so I encourage our audience to reach out with him if they have any questions on the future finance or technology or the impact of the transformation agenda. He's definitely a go-to guy to help guide us as well. So Patrick, great resources. I suppose if our audience would like to continue the conversation, what's the best way to get in contact?
At Farnell Clark, at the website, farnellclark.co.uk. That's how you can reach us. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn. You just search for my name, so for Patrick Leavy. You'll find me there. And that's probably the best place, yeah.
Awesome. Well, Patrick, look, thanks for being such a great guest and taking us through your journey from engineering, psychology, to the schools, to the, actually the documentaries, don't forget though, like the music industry, film industry, and that's where you currently are now in accounting. So again, thank you for being such a great guest and investing time with us today.
All right, Andrew. Well, thanks very much for having me.
So there you have it. Hope you enjoyed today's show. If you'd like to know more about our guests today, their bio, and follow up on the resources mentioned during the show, you can find all the relevant links and more at sitnshow.com. There you'll also be able to get access to earlier shows, read the latest blogs. There's also an opportunity to subscribe to our newsletter, which will give you heads up as to when the next show is coming out, latest events, news, and anything that's going to be relevant to help you have a fun, rewarding and successful career in finance and accounting. And just before you go, we really appreciate your feedback. If there's something we can do better on the show, something that's not working, or something you'd like to see, even a guest you'd like for us to invite onto the show, someone who you think might be able to benefit you more and also the rest of our community, please let me know. You can email me. I'm at andrew@sitnshow.com, or feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just drop me a message so I know how you found me and we can connect. And really, it's our community that'll make the show. If we keep engaging and driving each other on, we'll keep on building our strength in the numbers. When all is said and done, if we can do the numbers better and finance better, we'll create more opportunities for ourselves, our friends, our families, our communities and our businesses. So until next time, have a good rest of the week, take care, and let's keep building our strength in the numbers.